3 weeks had passed since Daho first treated the creature's wounds, and their secret friendship had grown stronger with each passing day. The beast, which Daho had started calling Kroll in his mind, after hearing it make certain sounds, had healed completely from its injuries. The infected cuts were now just thin silver lines across its dark scales, like ancient battle scars that told stories of survival. Every night, when the station grew quiet, Daho would slip away from his small quarters and make his way to the cargo bay where Kroll waited for him. The creature had learned to recognize the sound of his footsteps in the metal corridors and would move to the front of its containment cell long before Daho appeared. The soft rumbling sounds it made when it saw him coming had become as familiar as his own heartbeat. But something new was happening that made Daho both excited and nervous. Kroll was trying to communicate with him in ways that went far beyond simple animal sounds. The creature had begun making specific clicking noises with its throat while moving its 4 hands in deliberate patterns. It would repeat the same sequences over and over again, as if it was trying to teach Daho a lesson that he was too slow to understand. At first, Daho thought these might just be random movements, but his background in studying alien languages told him otherwise. Back on Earth, he had spent years reading about how different species might develop communication systems based on their physical abilities and environment. Most humans thought this knowledge was useless since they had never encountered intelligent alien life before. But now, sitting across from Kroll in the blue glow of the containment field, Daho realized that all those years of study might finally have a purpose. The breakthrough came on a Tuesday night when Kroll did something that made Daho's heart race with excitement. The creature knelt down and used one of its clawed fingers to draw symbols in the thin layer of dust that had accumulated on the floor of its cell. The marks were not random scratches, but carefully planned shapes that looked almost like a star map. Daho pressed his face against the containment field to get a better look and gasped when he recognized what he was seeing. The symbols showed the positions of stars and planets in a pattern that matched the asteroid belt where the mining team had captured Kroll. But there were additional markings that seemed to indicate movement and direction, as if the creature was trying to show him a journey or a destination over the following nights. Kroll continued drawing more complex diagrams in the dust. Each new symbol added another piece to a puzzle that Daho was desperately trying to solve. The creature would point to certain marks and make specific sounds, as if it was giving him a vocabulary lesson in its own language. Slowly, painfully, Daho began to understand fragments of what Kroll was trying to tell him. The most important discovery came when Kroll drew a symbol that looked like multiple figures standing together, then pointed to itself and made a long, mournful sound that reminded Daho of wolves howling at the moon. Back on Earth, it was clear that Kroll was not alone. Somewhere out in the vast darkness of space, there were others of its kind, and they were searching for their missing friend. The implications of this knowledge hit Daho like a physical blow. If Kroll belonged to a larger group, and if that group was intelligent enough to organize search parties, then Station Alpha 7 might be in serious danger. The crew had assumed they were dealing with a single wild animal, but the truth was far more complicated and potentially deadly. Daho knew he had to warn Captain Sung-woo, but he also knew that nobody would believe him. The crew already thought he was strange and obsessed with the creature they called a monster. How could he possibly convince them that he had learned to communicate with it, and that it was trying to warn them about an approaching threat? He decided to try anyway, because the alternative was too terrible to consider. If Kroll's people found the station and discovered that their friend was being held prisoner, the consequences could be catastrophic for everyone aboard. The next morning, Daho requested a private meeting with Captain Sung-woo in his office. The captain was a tired-looking man in his 50s who had spent most of his career managing mining operations in the outer regions of human space. He listened with growing impatience as Daho tried to explain what he had learned from his conversations with Kroll. Captain Sung-woo interrupted him before he could finish speaking and said that his obsession with the creature had clearly affected his mental health. He ordered Daho to report to Medical Officer Hai-jin for a complete psychological evaluation and warned him that any further contact with the prisoner was strictly forbidden. The news of Daho's meeting with the captain spread quickly through the station's small crew. By lunchtime, everyone was talking about how the weird language expert had finally lost his mind completely. Engineer Borum made loud jokes about Daho having conversations with monsters, while Communications Officer Minacio suggested that maybe he should be locked up in a cell next to his alien friend. Security Chief Kungmin was particularly cruel in his mockery. He cornered Daho in the mess hall during dinner and announced to everyone present that the station's monster whisperer thought he could predict the future by reading scratches in the dirt. The entire crew erupted in laughter while Daho sat alone at his table, feeling his face burn with embarrassment and frustration. Only Medical Officer Hai-jin showed any real concern for his well-being. She had been friends with Daho since they both joined the crew 2 years ago, and she could see that something was genuinely troubling him during his psychological evaluation. She asked gentle questions about his sleep patterns and stress levels, but Daho could tell that even she was beginning to doubt his sanity. That night, as he lay in his narrow bunk staring at the ceiling, Daho felt more alone than he had ever felt in his life. The entire crew thought he was crazy, and none of them would listen to his warnings about the danger they might be facing. But down in the cargo bay, Kroll was probably wondering why his human friend had not come to visit, and that thought was somehow even worse than being mocked by his crewmate. The universe suddenly felt much larger and more dangerous than it had before, and Daeho was the only person on Station Alpha 7 who, when I'd understood what was really happening. Daeho walked through the cold metal halls of Station Alpha 7 with his head down. As usual, the other crew members always stared at him. When he passed and he could hear them whispering behind his back, he was different from them, and everyone knew it. While they spent their free time playing cards or watching entertainment videos, Daeho preferred to read books about alien languages and study star charts that most people found boring. The mining station floated in the empty darkness of space, far from Earth, where Daeho had grown up in a small apartment with his grandmother. She had always told him that the universe was full of wonders waiting to be discovered, but the crew of Alpha 7 only saw the universe as a place to dig up valuable minerals and get rich quick. 3 weeks ago, everything changed when the mining team brought back something unexpected from the asteroid belt. Instead of just rocks and metal, they had captured a living creature unlike anything anyone had ever seen before. The beast was massive, standing 12 feet tall with 4 powerful arms that could probably crush a human without effort. Its skin was covered in dark scales that seemed to shift color in the light, like oil on water. Captain Sungwoo had ordered the creature locked in the cargo bay behind the strongest containment field they had. The energy barrier hummed constantly, creating a blue glow around the prison cell that reminded Daeho of summer lightning back on Earth. Most of the crew were terrified of the thing and refused to go near it, except when absolutely necessary. Security Chief Kungmin was the worst of them all. He would walk past the containment area and spit on the floor while cursing about the monster that had killed 3 of their miners during capture. The creature had fought back when they tried to trap it using weapons and tools that had torn through their equipment like paper. But now it sat quietly in its prison, staring at the walls with eyes that held an intelligence that made Daeho uncomfortable in a different way than the others. The first time Daeho saw the creature up close, he was working his assigned shift as a guard. It was supposed to be punishment duty since Captain Sungwoo thought he was too weak for the dangerous mining work outside the station. But as Daeho sat in the observation chair watching the beast, he noticed something that everyone else had missed. The creature was hurt. There were deep cuts along its arms and legs from the capture that had become infected. The wounds were turning a sick yellow color, and the creature kept trying to reach them with its long fingers, but the containment field stopped it from properly cleaning the injuries. Daeho had studied basic medical training before joining the crew, and he recognized the signs of serious infection. He tried to tell the others, but they just laughed at him. Engineer Borum slapped him on the back so hard it knocked him forward and said that monsters deserved to suffer for what they did to good humans. Communications Officer Minesio rolled her eyes and said that Daeho was too soft-hearted for space work and should have stayed on Earth with his books. But Daeho could not stop thinking about the infected wounds. Every time he looked at the creature, he saw the pain in its strange eyes that seemed to glow with a dim red light in the darkness of the cargo bay. The creature would press its face against the containment field and make low, rumbling sounds that might have been communication or might have been just animal noises. After a week of watching the creature suffer, Daeho made a decision that would change everything. He waited until the night shift, when most of the crew were asleep and only the automated systems were running the station. Then he took medical supplies from the emergency kit and headed to the cargo bay. His hands were shaking as he approached the containment controls. He had never done anything like this before, and if Captain Sungwoo found out, he would probably be thrown off the station at the next supply drop. But the creature looked up at him with those intelligent eyes, and Daeho knew he could not walk away. The containment field required a security code to lower, but Daeho had watched Kungmin enter it dozens of times. The numbers were simple to remember because the security chief was not very creative with passwords. Daeho typed in the code and held his breath as the blue energy barrier flickered and disappeared. The creature did not move toward him or try to escape. Instead, it sat perfectly still and watched as Daeho slowly stepped into the cell with the medical kit in his hands. The beast was even more impressive up close, with scales that were actually quite beautiful in their own way. Each one caught the light differently, creating patterns that seemed to move across its skin like living artwork. Daeho held up the antiseptic spray and bandages so the creature could see them. He spoke in a soft voice, saying that he wanted to help and would not hurt it. The creature tilted its massive head to one side and made a sound that was almost like a question, as if it was asking why this small human was being kind when all the others had been cruel. Working slowly and carefully, Daeho began cleaning the infected wounds. The creature flinched at first when the antiseptic touched the cuts, but then it seemed to understand what was happening. It held very still and let Daeho work, even though its claws could have easily torn him apart. The process took over an hour, but finally all the wounds were clean and properly bandaged. The creature examined Daeho's work by twisting its arms to look at the white medical tape. Then it did something amazing. It reached out with one massive hand and very gently touched Daeho's shoulder. The gesture was so careful and deliberate that Daeho knew it was saying thank you. From that night forward, everything changed between them. Daeho continued his secret visits to treat the creature's wounds, and slowly they began to heal. The creature would move closer to the containment field when it saw him coming and would make soft rumbling sounds that seemed almost like a greeting. Other crew members noticed a change in the creature's behavior, but they did not understand what was causing it. Kyungmin was angry that the monster seemed less aggressive and complained that it was probably planning some kind of escape. The crew began making jokes about how the beast was getting soft and lazy in captivity, but Daeho knew the truth. The creature was not getting soft or lazy. It was learning to trust, and that trust was the beginning of something that would shake the foundations of everything the crew believed about monsters and the true nature of intelligence in the universe. The alarms started screaming at exactly 0347 station time while most of the crew was still asleep in their bunks. Daeho jerked awake as red emergency lights began flashing throughout his small quarters, and the automated voice of the station's computer announced that unknown vessels had been detected approaching their position. He threw on his uniform and ran toward the command center along with everyone else on the station, but his heart was already sinking because he knew exactly what those unknown vessels probably were. The warnings that Kroll had been trying to give him through drawings and gestures were about to become a terrifying reality. Captain Sungwoo was already at his post, staring at the main display screen with a face that had gone completely white. The tactical readout showed dozens of massive ships surrounding Station Alpha 7 in a perfect formation that spoke of military precision and overwhelming force. The vessels were unlike anything in human databases, with dark hulls that seemed to absorb light and weapon arrays that bristled along their sides like the spines of some prehistoric monster. Communications officer Minesko worked frantically at her console trying to establish contact with the unknown fleet, but her hands were shaking so badly she could barely operate the controls. Engineer Borum stood behind her muttering prayers under his breath while Security Chief Kyungmin paced back and forth like a caged animal with his hand resting on the weapon at his side. The largest of the alien ships was easily 10 times the size of their mining station, and its hull was decorated with symbols that meant nothing to human eyes but somehow conveyed a sense of ancient power and terrible purpose. When it moved closer to their position, the entire station vibrated with the force of its massive engines. Then the communication system crackled to life with a sound that made everyone in the command center freeze in terror. It was a voice, speaking in the same clicking language that Daeho had been learning from Kroll, but amplified and translated through some kind of universal device. The words came out in mechanical human speech that was perfectly clear and absolutely terrifying. The alien voice demanded the immediate return of their captured scout and gave the humans exactly 1 hour to comply with his request. If their friend was not released unharmed within that time limit, the entire station would be destroyed and everyone aboard would die. The transmission ended with a sound that might have been a war cry or a promise of vengeance. Captain Sungwoo turned to look at his crew with eyes that showed he finally understood how badly he had misjudged the situation. They were not dealing with a simple animal or even a primitive alien species. They had captured a member of an advanced civilization that possessed technology far beyond human capabilities, and now that civilization wanted their friend back. Security Chief Kyungmin was the first to break the stunned silence that filled the command center. He suggested that they should immediately jettison the creature into space and hope that would satisfy the aliens, but Captain Sungwoo shook his head and said it was probably too late for that kind of simple solution. The alien fleet had come prepared for war, and their ships were positioned to prevent any escape from the station. Even if they released the prisoner now, there was no guarantee that the aliens would show mercy to the humans, who had held their friend captive for weeks. Medical Officer Hyjin whispered that maybe they should have listened to Daeho when he tried to warn them about this possibility, but her words were barely audible over the sound of the station's hull creaking under the gravitational stress of so many massive ships. Near Daeho knew that this was the moment he had been dreading and hoping for at the same time. Everyone on the station was about to discover that he had been right all along about Kroll's intelligence and the danger they were facing. But being right would not matter if they all died in the next hour. He stepped forward and told Captain Sungwoo that he needed to speak with Kroll immediately because he might be the only person who could communicate with the alien fleet and prevent a massacre. The captain stared at him for a long moment while the countdown clock on the main screen showed 53 minutes remaining until the deadline. Finally, Captain Sungwoo nodded and said that Daeho should do whatever he could to save them all because traditional human diplomacy was clearly not going to work in this situation. The entire crew followed him as he ran through the corridors toward the cargo bay where Kroll had been waiting patiently for his people to find him. When they reached the containment area, Daeho could see that Kroll was no longer the calm and gentle creature he had befriended over the past few weeks. The alien was standing at the front of its cell with all 4 arms pressed against the energy barrier, and its scales had changed color to a deep red that pulsed like a heartbeat. The creature was making sounds that Daeho had never heard before, complex clicking patterns that seemed to carry across impossible distances to the ships waiting outside. Even through the station's thick hull and the vacuum of space, Kroll was somehow communicating with its people and telling them about everything that had happened during its captive. Ho approached the containment field and placed his hand against the energy barrier in the same spot where Kroll had its massive palm. The alien looked down at him with eyes that now glowed like burning cold, and for a moment the connection between them felt stronger than it had ever been before. The countdown clock showed 41 minutes remaining, and the fate of everyone on Station Alpha 7 depended entirely on whether the bond between a human outcast and an alien prisoner could bridge the gap between two species that had never met before. In the distance, the alien fleet waited with weapons that could turn their small mining station into cosmic dust, and Daiho knew that the next few minutes would determine whether first contact between humans and this alien race would end in friendship or total annihilation. With 35 minutes left on the countdown clock, Captain Sungwoo made the decision that would either save them all or doom them to certain death. He ordered the containment field around Kroll to be lowered and told Daiho to escort the alien to the main docking bay, where a shuttle from the alien fleet was waiting to retrieve their missing Scaltha. Plan seemed simple enough, but everyone on the station knew that nothing about this situation was actually simple. The alien fleet had weapons pointed at them, and one wrong move could result in the complete destruction of Station Alpha 7. Along with everyone aboard, Daiho felt his hands shaking as he approached Kroll without the energy barrier between them for the first time since that night weeks ago when he had first treated the creature's wounds. The alien was much larger and more powerful than him, but it made soft clicking sounds that seemed to mean it. Understood what was happening. Together they began walking through the station's corridors toward the docking bay, while the rest of the crew watched from a safe distance. Captain Sungwoo had ordered everyone to stay back and let Daiho handle the escort duty alone, since he was the only person the alien seemed to trust. The journey should have taken less than 10 minutes, but Security Chief Kyungmin had other plans. He had been growing more angry and frustrated with each passing minute as he watched events unfold in ways that made him look foolish and wrong about everything. Kyungmin had spent weeks telling everyone that the creature was nothing more than a dangerous animal that deserved to be caged or killed. Now he was being forced to watch as that same creature walked freely through the station, accompanied by the one crew member he had mocked and bullied the most. When Daiho and Kroll reached the intersection near the main corridor, Kyungmin was waiting for them with his plasma rifle drawn and pointed directly at the alien. He stepped out from behind a storage container and shouted that he would not allow a traitor to hand over station secrets to the Anima. Daiho tried to explain that they were not giving away any secrets and that Kroll just wanted to return to its people, but Kyungmin was beyond listening to reason. He had convinced himself that the alien had somehow brainwashed Daiho into becoming a collaborator who was working against human interests. The security chief raised his weapon and took aim at Kroll's massive form, while screaming that all aliens were enemies of humanity and should be destroyed before they could harm innocent people. His finger tightened on the trigger, and Daiho could see the deadly energy building up inside the plasma rifle's charging chain seemed to slow down as Daiho realized what was about to happen. The shot would kill Kroll, and the alien fleet would respond by obliterating the entire station along with everyone on it. There would be no survivors and no chance for peace between the two species. Without thinking about his own safety, Daiho threw himself sideways and put his own body between the weapon and his alien friend. The plasma bolt that was meant for Kroll struck him in the chest with the force of a lightning strike and sent him crashing to the metal floor. The pain was unlike anything Daiho had ever experienced before. It felt like his entire chest was on fire, and he could taste blood in his mouth as he struggled to breathe. His vision began to blur, but he could still see Kroll standing over him with all four hands reaching down as if trying to help. The alien let out a sound that shook the entire station and made the metal walls vibrate with its intensity. It was not the gentle rumbling that I had grown used to hearing during their quiet conversations, but something far more primal, and terrafuncral scales changed color from their normal dark sheen to a deep red that seemed to glow with inner fire. The creature had been calm and peaceful during its weeks in captivity, but now something ancient and dangerous had awakened inside it as it saw its human friend bleeding on the floor. Security Chief Kyungmin dropped his weapon and backed away from the alien as he realized that he had made a terrible mistake. The creature he had always thought of as a mindless beast was now looking at him with intelligence and fury that promised swift and terrible revenge. Captain Sungwoo and the rest of the crew came running when they heard the roar echoing through the corridors, but they stopped short when they saw what had happened. Medical Officer Hygiene pushed past everyone else and knelt beside Daiho to check his wounds while Kroll stood guard over them. Both the alien gently lifted Daiho's wounded form in its forearms, being incredibly careful not to cause any additional pain. The sight of human blood staining the creature's dark scales created an image that would be burned into the memory of every crew member who witnessed it for the first time. The crew could see the true depth of the bond that had formed between Daiho and Kroll. This was not just friendship between different species, but something deeper and more powerful than they had ever imagined possible. Captain Sungwoo stared at the scene in shock and finally understood that they had been completely wrong about everything. The creature was not a monster, and Daiho was not crazy. The real monster had been their own fear and prejudice, and now that monster that had nearly destroyed their only chance for survival. Outside the station, the alien fleet was waiting for word from their scout, and the countdown clock showed less than 20 minutes before their deadline expired. The fate of Station Alpha 7 depended entirely on whether Daiho would survive his wounds and whether Kroll would be able to forgive the humans for what they had done. The alien fleet responded to Kroll's distress call within seconds of the plasma rifle attack, and their reaction was swift and absolutely terrifying. Every weapon system on every ship powered up simultaneously, creating an energy signature so massive that it overloaded Station Alpha 7's south sensor arrays and plunged half the station into darkness. Captain Sungwoo found himself staring at communication displays that showed the aliens were no longer interested in simple prisoner exchange or peaceful negotiations. They had received detailed information from Kroll about the attack on his human friend, and now they wanted something that human civilization had never been forced to give. Before justice, the elite alien ship transmitted a message that made everyone in the command center understand how completely their situation had changed. The aliens were not going to destroy the station quickly with their massive weapons. Instead, they were going to board it and take everyone prisoner so they could face trial for the crime of harming someone who had shown kindness to their scout medical officer. Hyjin worked desperately in the station's small medical bay, trying to save Daeho's life, while Kroll stood beside the treatment table, refusing to move away from his wounded friend. The alien had calmed down slightly, but its scales were still glowing that dangerous red color, and its eyes never stopped watching every move that Hyjin made. The plasma bolt had torn through Daeho's chest and damaged several vital organs, but somehow it had missed his heart and major blood vessels by just a few centimeters. Hyjin had seen similar wounds before during mining accidents, and she knew that he had maybe a 50% chance of survival if she could stop the internal bleeding. Kroll seemed to understand what was happening because it began making soft clicking sounds that were clearly meant to comfort its human friend. Even though Daeho was unconscious, the alien continued talking to him in its own language, as if the sound of its voice might help pull him back from the edge of death. Outside the medical bay, the rest of the crew huddled together in the command center, watching their sensor displays as dozens of alien boarding craft launched from the massive warships. The small attack vessels moved with precise military coordination and would reach the station in less than 15 minutes. Captain Sungwoo tried desperately to communicate with the alien fleet commander, but his messages were ignored or answered with demands that could not be satisfied. The aliens wanted Security Chief Kungmin to face justice for his attack on Daeho, but they also wanted guarantees that humans would never again capture or harm members of their species. Engineer Borum suggested that they should try to escape in the station's emergency shuttles, but Communications Officer Menesio pointed out that the alien ships had them completely surrounded and would destroy any vessel that tried to leave. The boarding craft attached themselves to Station Alpha 7 with metallic clanging sounds that echoed through the hull, and then the aliens began cutting through the outer airlocks with tools that sliced through reinforced steel like it was paper. Security Chief Kungmin had barricaded himself in his quarters and was refusing to come out, even though everyone knew that the aliens would find him eventually. The man who had always acted tough and fearless was now cowering behind locked doors, while the consequences of his prejudice and hatred came looking for him. The first group of alien warriors entered the station through the main airlock and immediately began moving toward the medical bay where their scout was waiting. They were smaller than Kroll, but still impressively large, with the same dark scales and four-armed bodies that marked them as members of the same species. Captain Sungwoo and his crew pressed themselves against the walls as the aliens marched past without giving them a second glance. It was clear that these warriors had specific orders and were not interested in harming anyone except the person who had attacked their friend's human companion. When they reached the medical bay, the alien warriors stopped and waited respectfully outside while their scout communicated with them in rapid clicking patterns that sounded like a detailed report being given to superior officers. Medical Officer Hyjin looked up from her work on Daeho and saw that she was now surrounded by creatures who could tear her apart without effort, but they were not threatening her. Instead, they seemed genuinely concerned about the condition of the human who had befriended their scout. One of the warriors stepped forward and began speaking in translated human language. It said that their people had never encountered humans before and had assumed they were all violent and dangerous, like most species they had met during their travels through the galaxy. But Kroll had told them about one human who was different, someone who had shown kindness and compassion even when it put him at risk with his own people. The warriors wanted to know if this human would survive his wounds and what they could do to help save his life. Hyjin explained that Daeho needed surgery and blood transfusions that were beyond her abilities with the station's limited medical equipment. The alien warriors immediately contacted their fleet, and within minutes a team of alien medical specialists were on their way to the station with advanced healing technologies. The alien doctors worked alongside Hyjin to save Daeho's life. The warriors searched the station for Security Chief Kungmin. They found him hiding in his quarters and dragged him to the command center, where he was forced to face the consequences of his actions. But instead of executing him immediately, the aliens did something unexpected. They began asking questions about human society and why some humans like Daeho could show kindness to aliens, while others like Kungmin could only show hatred and fear. Captain Sungwoo realized that this was not just about punishing one man for his crimes, but about determining whether humanity, as a whole, was worthy of peaceful contact with an advanced alien civilization. The aliens were using this incident to judge the entire human race. Hours passed as the alien medical team worked to repair the damage to Daeho's body using techniques and equipment that seemed like magic to the human observers. When they finally announced that he would survive and make a full recovery, the tension on the station decreased noticeably. Kroll made a sound that was clearly relief and gently touched Daeho's hand as the human slowly opened his eyes and looked around the medical bay. The first thing he saw was his alien friend standing beside him, and he managed to smile. Despite the pain from his injuries, the alien fleet commander finally agreed to spare the station and its crew, but only because one human had proven that his species was capable of wisdom and compassion. Security Chief Kungmin was taken aboard an alien ship to face trial, but the others were allowed to remain free. As the alien fleet prepared to depart, Kroll faced a difficult choice between staying with his human friend and returning to his own people. Daeho made the decision for both of them by saying that Kroll belonged with his family among the stars, but that they would always be connected by the bond they had formed. The crew of Station Alpha 7 watched in amazement as their former prisoner walked freely to the alien shuttle that would take him home. They had learned that the real beast was not the creature they had captured, but the fear and hatred that lived inside their own hearts. And they had learned that sometimes the greatest strength comes not from weapons or technology, but from the simple act of showing kindness to someone who is different from yourself.